Hey, Mike here. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Dark Poutine early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Welcome back to Dark Poutine. I'm Mike Brown, and I see Matthew Stockton. How are you?
Hello. I am good.
You're good? I like your shirt today. Very, very colorful. You've got geishas on a motorcycle. And
a geisha girl on a motorcycle today. Yeah.
And it's lime green and bright yellow and fuchsia. Wow.
Yep.
All kinds of colors.
Well, we're approaching summer, so I like to zhuzh it up a bit, you know?
All right.
Yep.
This episode, it has a lot of heart. Matthew said it was a bit technical. So what? I kind of like the technical aspects of it. It's technical because I got to look at an inquiry of the whole incident. We can really do a blow-by-blow in this story. So let's get to it.
The views, information, and opinions expressed during the Dark Poutine podcast are solely those of the producer and do not necessarily represent those of Curious Cast, its affiliate, Global News, nor their parent company, Chorus Entertainment.
Dark Poutine is not for the faint of heart or squeamish. Listener discretion is strongly advised. We're not experts on the topics we present, nor are we journalists. We're two ordinary Canadian schmucks chatting about crime and the dark side of history. Let's get to it. Put on your toque, grab yourself a double-double and a Nanaimo bar. It's time to scarf down some Dark Poutine.
You are responsible for obtaining and maintaining at your own cost all equipment needed to listen to Dark Poutine. Dark Poutine can be addictive. Side effects may include, but not be limited to, pausing and questioning the system, elevated heart rate, pondering humanity, odd looks from colleagues as you laugh out loud at work, family members not into true crime worrying about you. Positive side effects may include some perspectives and opinions that you disagree with, as well as some wokeness and empathy. If you don't think Dark Poutine is for you, consult your doctor immediately.
It's the 2nd of June, 1983, a Thursday. At 33,000 feet over the American Midwest, Air Canada Flight 797 is doing what airplanes do. 41 passengers, 5 crew, a DC-9 humming northeast toward Toronto and Montreal. The drink service has come and gone. Some people are reading, some are asleep. The late afternoon light through the windows is going golden at the edges. In the back of the cabin sits a man who doesn't quite fit the space he's been given. Large in the way certain people are large. Not just tall, but present. He's been in Texas all week playing music at a festival in the hill country. Now he's going home. He has a wife waiting, children, and an album that's almost finished. He's 33 years old, and by any measure, he has a great deal left to do. In the cockpit behind the captain's left shoulder, there's a small panel of circuit breakers. At 6:51 in the evening Eastern Time, 3 of them trip in rapid succession. The captain reaches back and tries to reset them. They won't latch. He assumes the flush motor in the rear lavatory has seized, makes a mental note, and moves on. In the cabin, nobody notices. The fire has already been burning for several minutes. No one on board knows it yet. What happens in the next 28 minutes will kill 23 people, reshape international aviation safety law, and silence one of Canada's greatest voices forever. You're listening to Dark Poutine episode 418, Air Canada Flight 797, The Death of Stan Rogers. If you know anything about Stan Rogers, you can probably picture the scene. A festival stage somewhere in the early 80s, he stops a song partway through to retune his guitar. The crowd waits. And while he's tuning, he just talks. About the songs he's about to sing, about where it came from, about some particular stretch of Nova Scotia coastline that he loves. Funny, specific, and warm. Then he drops back into the song. And that voice comes out of him. Enormous, unhurried, chest deep. And the crowd goes quiet in that particular way. The kind of quiet an audience makes when it doesn't want to miss a single word. Stan Rogers had that effect on people. He was more than a musician. He was a storyteller. Stan Rogers was born in Hamilton, Ontario on November 29, 1949, the second of 4 children. His father, Nathan, was from Ontario, but his mother, Eleanor, was from Canso, a small fishing village on the northeastern tip of Nova Scotia, a place of salt air, wooden boats, and men who made their living from the North Atlantic. The Rogers family spent summers there throughout Stan's childhood, and Canso got into him in a way that only a place can. The accent, the songs people sang, the way the ocean looked in the morning, and what it meant to the people who depended on it. He absorbed all of it, and he never really left. Even after he grew up and moved away, some essential part of him stayed on that coastline, and it showed up years later in every song he wrote. He was a big man, 6'3", broad-shouldered, the physical presence of someone you'd trust to pull you out of deep water. And then he opened his mouth, and it turned out his voice was even bigger than he was. A baritone of unusual depth and unusual warmth. It was a voice that simply arrived and filled whatever space it was in the way heat fills a room. People who saw him live in small venues, coffee houses, folk clubs, and church halls often said the experience was almost disorienting. You weren't expecting something that size in a room that small. Stan Rogers came up through the Canadian folk revival of the 1970s, playing the circuit that ran through coffee houses and university campuses, building an audience one room at a time. He appeared on CBC Radio. He played the festivals, Mariposa, the Winnipeg Folk Festival, Northern Lights Festival Boreal in Sudbury, where in 1976 he first performed Barrett's Privateers live. That song would become his most beloved. In 1981, he played the Gathering of the Clans in Scotland as Nova Scotia's official representative. He was not famous in the mainstream sense. He never had a hit single, never crossed over into pop radio, and never, not while he was alive, became a household name outside of folk music circles. What he had instead was something more durable, the kind of devoted following that forms around artists who seem to be telling the truth.
Folk music in the charts is kind of an oxymoron if you think about it, Mike.
Yeah, because that's not where they want to be, really. They don't want to be top 40.
Canadian folk is not a single identity, right? It's a collection of different types of music in some ways. A lot of it comes from immigrant traditions, like Irish or Scottish or French, and that was brought over here. And, you know, you get like Celtic influence in the East Coast and fiddle music in Quebec and ballads in the prairies and a quilt of styles of Indigenous folk music.
Sure.
And I think when people connect with folk in Canada, they're not just connecting with the sound, they're kind of connecting to a version of history. And sometimes it's a very specific one. And I think why it lands so strongly for some people is because it feels rooted and it feels like continuity to them.
Yeah.
Meredith loves folk music. She does folk dancing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's never been my music. I'm not slamming it because music is truly a personal choice.
Right.
And I wouldn't slam anyone's choice in music except for Reba McEntire. But I tend to lean towards more contemporary stuff or something more aspirational or something that feels more like it's reaching forward and experimenting versus holding on to where we came from, and that's what folk kind of is. And, again, I don't judge people for their music.
I love the nostalgia of folk.
See, I kind of don't, but I did stop and listen to some of his songs before this morning, before we started recording. And like I said, not my type of music, but I can recognize that he was a damn fine musician.
He was a talented person.
He really was. I'm like, okay, this isn't my style, but he has talent, man. And this is a great loss for Canadian culture.
Absolutely, yeah. Stan Rogers' first album, Fogarty's Cove, was released in 1977. The title came from a harbor near Canso. The songs were about maritime life, fishermen, sailing ships, and the feel of working on or near the water. 45 Years, a love song, became one of the most beloved songs in Canadian folk music. Barrett's Privateers, a rollicking, mournful sea shanty about a doomed privateer voyage, became something people sang in bars, and they still do. In some parts of the country, all you need to do is yell out, "Oh, the year was 1778," and someone will call back, "How I wish I was in Sherbrooke now." Barrett's Privateers is the kind of song that sounds like it's been around for 200 years, which is exactly the effect Stan Rogers intended. He loved stories about the line running from the people who built Canada with their hands in hard places for modest wages to the people alive today. The album Turnaround followed in 1978, Between the Breaks live in 1979, and Northwest Passage in 1981. The title track of Northwest Passage was unlike anything Stan had written before. An epic, sweeping 8-minute piece built around the historical search for a sea route through the Canadian Arctic, Franklin's Lost Expedition, a story we covered way back in episode 52 of Dark Poutine. Franklin, Frobisher, and Davis all went north in search of a passage and didn't come back. The song, sung a cappella by Stan with his band singing harmony, feels like a slow, aching voyage through ice-choked waters and memory, where the weight of history presses in with every mile and the horizon never delivers relief. It carries a quiet, reverent loneliness, part longing, part national myth, where the search for passage is not only about geography, but about identity, endurance, and the ghosts of those who came before. That's the thing about Stan Rogers at his best. He didn't need to explain what it meant to be from this country. He just made you feel it. By 1983, Stan Rogers was 33 years old, and he was in the middle of what would become his most accomplished album, From Fresh Water. The record he was finishing that summer was different from what he'd done before. Where Fogarty's Cove had been rooted in the Atlantic coast, From Fresh Water turned inland to the Great Lakes, to the St. Lawrence, to the rivers and lochs of central Canada. He was broadening his canvas. The songs were more complex and the arrangements more layered. People who heard him play the new material live that year said it felt like he was entering a new phase, not abandoning what had made him, but building on it. In late May and early June of 1983, he was in Texas performing at the Kerrville Folk Festival, one of the most important gatherings of the North American folk circuit, held every year in the Texas Hill Country. He performed his sets, he sang the songs people knew and worked on the new ones. He was, by all accounts, in good spirits and good voice. On the evening of June 2nd, Stan Rogers boarded Air Canada Flight 797 at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The flight was heading to Toronto with a connection to Montreal. Stan was going home to his wife Ariel and their 2 children, home to the album waiting to be finished. The airplane he stepped onto had a history. Canadian Registry C-FTLU was a McDonnell Douglas DC-9 32. manufactured on April 7, 1968, and delivered directly to Air Canada, then a Canadian Crown Corporation, on the day it rolled out of the factory. By June of 1983, the aircraft had been in continuous service for 15 years. It was not old by commercial aviation standards, but it was not young either. In terms of kilometers, it had been around the world many times. The first thing worth knowing about this specific airplane is what happened to it on September 17, 1979. Shortly after takeoff from Logan International Airport in Boston, the aft pressure bulkhead, the structural wall that separates the pressurized passenger cabin from the tail section, failed in flight. The resulting depressurization was sudden and severe. Damage to the rear of the aircraft was extensive. McDonnell Douglas and Air Canada carried out major repairs over the following 2 months, and the airplane was returned to service that December. As part of those repairs, wire bundles throughout the aft section were cut, examined, and spliced back together. The new electrical connections were made in the walls and floor of the area immediately surrounding the aft lavatory, the bathroom. In June of 1982, Air Canada refurbished the passenger cabin. They installed new overhead bins, new wall and ceiling panels. Everything installed met the fire safety standards required by federal regulation at the time. Everything passed the prescribed tests. Another thing worth noting about this airplane is its maintenance record in the year leading up to June 2, 1983. Between June 1982 and the day of the accident, maintenance crews logged 76 separate complaints about the aircraft's electrical systems. Generator problems, power failures, faults were identified, fixed, and signed off, and then came back. In the final month alone, 38 of those complaints were about the same generator in the tail section of the plane. No single entry in that log was necessarily cause for grounding the airplane. These were problems that were identified, addressed, and signed off on. That's how maintenance works, but read together, they describe an aircraft with a restless, troubled electrical system, one that had been complaining in the particular language of circuit breakers and relay malfunctions for the better part of a year. In the aft section, near the lavatory. On May 2, 1983, a maintenance card noted that insulation near the rear of the aircraft was soaked with toilet detergent. Connectors were tightened, insulation was replaced, the card was signed off. 31 days later, Flight 797 departed Dallas at 4:25 in the afternoon with 41 passengers and 5 crew. It climbed to 33,000 feet and turned northeast toward Toronto. About 30 minutes into the flight, a panel at the bottom of the cockpit door was accidentally kicked loose and fell to the floor. Someone set it to one side. They would deal with it later. The flight continued. The sky ahead was clear. The engines were running just fine. There was no reason from the outside to expect anything other than an unremarkable flight.
So Final Destination is in my head, the movie,
Yeah.
right? And, Justin, my husband and I, like we've gone through all of the, all of those airplane crash TV shows where they investigate.
Yeah, this event was one of those shows.
It was. And I talk about that a bit later on because suddenly I realized, oh my God, I've seen this one.
Yeah.
The fact that they go back and rebuild everything piece by piece, like the story of the failure, it's never one thing. A bolt loosens or a sensor gives a slightly wrong reading.
Yeah.
And then the system compensates for it. And then that compensation creates a new problem. And on its own, any one of these things isn't catastrophic, but it ripples. And that's the one thing about watching those shows is that this feeling of Final Destination, like once it starts, all these things click into place in the worst possible way.
Yeah.
How you're describing this is what it feels like, but not a moment, but a series of small things that kept building until there was no way to stop it.
Yep, a chain of events leading to an inevitability.
Yeah.
The cockpit voice recorder picked up the first sign of trouble just after 6:48 p.m. The transcript describes it simply as a, quote, sound similar to arcing, end quote. 3 minutes later, 2 more. Then at 6:51 p.m. came the first event the crew noticed. 3 circuit breakers tripping simultaneously, accompanied by what the transcript calls, quote, sounds similar to arcing and snapping, end quote. The first officer, hearing the sound, said, "What's that?" The captain's response is logged as a non-pertinent word. He was in the middle of eating his dinner. Seconds earlier, he'd asked the first officer whether his seafood was good. The first officer said it was, and the captain wondered about his steak. The first officer had replied, different, a little bit dry, but okay. This is what the cockpit sounded like as the plane headed toward disaster. 2 men eating dinner, unknowing that something at the rear of the plane was desperately wrong. They were talking the way people talk when they don't suspect anything is wrong. All seemed normal up to that point, other than a few little weird sounds. The captain identified the tripped circuit breakers, the aft toilet flushing circuit, and tried to reset them. They wouldn't latch. He tried again, still nothing. About a minute later, in an assessment offered to no one in particular, he said, quote, someone must have pushed a rag down the old toilet or something, eh? Jammed it and it overheated, end quote. He told the first officer to log it, finished his dinner, and the flight continued. Now here's what neither man knew. There was a fire on board, and you need to know something about where the fire was burning. The rear lavatory on a DC-9 is about the size of a closet. If you've been on an airplane, you know how tiny the washrooms are. Behind its walls and beneath its floor runs a network of wiring, ducts, and plumbing, hidden spaces that the plane's ventilation system uses to pull air through constantly, drawing it rearward and out through a vent near the tail, called the APU. In one of my most viewed Instagram posts, I called it the butthole of the plane. When a fire starts inside those spaces, the ventilation system does exactly what it's designed to do. It draws the smoke and heat away from the cabin and expels it outside the aircraft. The fire gets its own private exhaust. It can burn in the dark behind walls completely invisible to anyone in the cabin, and that's exactly what this fire did. The cockpit voice recorder had picked up 8 separate arcing sounds before those circuit breakers ever tripped. The crew never heard them. The sounds were captured on tape, but not acknowledged by the crew. The fire was already burning behind the lavatory walls while the captain was asking about a steak. At 6:59, almost 8 minutes after the breakers first tripped, the captain mentioned them again as an afterthought. He tried to reset them 3 more times in quick succession, each attempt accompanied by another arcing sound on the tape. His conclusion, pops as I push it. He left the breakers out and moved on. The time is 7 p.m. The fire's been burning undetected for somewhere between 9 and 15 minutes. About a minute later, a passenger in the last row noticed a strange odor and flagged down the number 3 flight attendant. She went to the lavatory, opened the door a few inches, and saw light gray smoke floor to ceiling. There were no flames she could detect. She inhaled some of the smoke, closed the door, and went to find the flight attendant in charge. He took the CO2 extinguisher and opened the door himself, wider, about 3/4. He also saw no flames. What he saw was thick black smoke seeping through the seams of the walls at the top of the sink basin at the ceiling. The fire was behind the walls. It had worked its way through enough of the interior structure to push smoke into the open space of the lavatory, but it was not in the room. It was in the hidden spaces where wiring ran, where no extinguisher could reach. He saturated the lavatory with CO2 anyway and closed the door. It accomplished nothing. He sent the number 2 flight attendant forward to tell the captain. At 7:02, she reached the cockpit and said, quote, excuse me, there's a fire in the washroom at the back. They're just, went back to go put it out, end quote. The captain, oh yeah? The first officer offered to go aft. The captain told him to go. The first officer went aft. He had no smoke goggles or breathing apparatus. The aircraft was not required to carry them. He couldn't get within several rows of the lavatory. Smoke had filled the rear of the cabin. The flight attendant in charge found him in the aisle and told him what he knew. He said, quote, I discharged the CO2. I could not find the source. I do not believe the fire is in the trash container. The first officer returned to the cockpit to get his smoke goggles. He did not pass this information to the captain. At 7:03, the flight attendant in charge appeared at the cockpit door, saying, quote, "Captain, is it okay to move everybody up as forward as possible?" The captain said yes. The fire had been burning for at least 17 minutes. No one's seen it. No one knows where it is. They'd only known about it for 3 minutes. The captain has been told that there's a fire in the washroom, and he's just beginning to consider descending. Everything happened very fast. More after a quick break. And we are back at the halfway point. Matthew, thoughts so far?
Yeah, my one thought here is, so as you know, Mike, like less so these days, but I have flown a lot, and I'm talking a lot. At one point, I was doing 30 long-haul flights a year.
That is a lot.
I mean, like London to Japan and back long-haul, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not somebody who gets nervous easily on an airplane at all, right? Like I get on an airplane, I fall asleep immediately, right?
Sure.
If there was ever even a hint of smoke on a plane, I am done. Land this sucker immediately. I don't care what it turns out to be. I don't care if it's probably nothing. I don't care if it's inconvenient. I just want to be on the ground. The one thing I don't understand about this story is, why didn't they immediately start landing when somebody thought there was smoke?
That may not have been policy at the time, yeah. And regardless, they'd only known about the smoke for 3 minutes. Maybe they thought it was something that they could contain at that point.
But for me, it should be policy, period, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and if I was on a plane where there was smoke and they're like, oh, it's okay. You know what I'd do? I'd like start acting erratically to force them to land.
Then you're dragged off the plane by ice.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, dear. Anyway. So when we left the cockpit of Flight 797, it was 7:03 Eastern Time. The captain knew there was a fire somewhere in the aft lavatory. His first officer had gone back a second time, now with smoke goggles, to try to reach it, but couldn't. At 7:04, the first officer dropped back into his seat and said what needed to be said. "I can't go back now. It's too heavy. I think we better go down." The captain didn't respond, because 9 seconds later, the flight attendant in charge appeared at the cockpit door. Quote, "I got all the passengers seated up front. You don't have to worry. I think it's going to be easing up." End quote. The first officer looked back into the cabin. The smoke did appear lighter. "It's starting to clear now," he said. So the captain waited, sending the first officer aft again to reassess. What looked like improvement wasn't. The NTSB would later conclude the smoke appeared to clear for the same reason the fire had stayed hidden so long. The ventilation system was doing its job, briefly pulling gases out of the cabin and venting them overboard. The fire itself was still burning. It was moving downward now, deeper into the floor, and the airflow that made the cabin look better was making everything else worse. The reports from the cabin kept coming. The smoke was subsiding, nearly cleared, almost done. Each one is accurate from the vantage point of the person delivering it. Each one incomplete in the way that mattered most. No one had seen the fire. No one knew where it was. The captain had a theory, the flush motor, the trash bin, and reports seemed to confirm it was being handled. At 7:05 p.m., an electrical pulse hit both radio channels. The left AC bus was failing. The master caution light came on. The captain called Indianapolis Center. Quote, "We've got an electrical problem here. We may be off communications shortly. Stand by." End quote. The stabilizer trim locked. The transponder went offline. Flight 797 was becoming invisible to radar. The first officer went aft for his second look and finally reached the lavatory door. He pressed his hand against it. It was warm. He didn't open it. He turned around and walked back to the cockpit quickly. He sat down at 7:07 p.m. and he said the sentence that closed the file on every optimistic report. Quote, "I don't like what's happening. I think we better go down. Okay?" The captain agreed, saying, "Okay." The captain would later testify that it was the sincere concern he heard in the first officer's voice that told him everything he needed to make the decision to land. At 7:07, the cockpit voice recorder went silent. The electrical systems were failing. The tape simply stopped. At 7:08, Flight 797 called Indianapolis Center. Mayday, mayday, mayday. The time from the first fire report to that call, 5 minutes and 32 seconds. The plane began descending. The captain flew the approach with no functioning stabilizer. The system that normally helps control the nose had locked up when the power failed. He extended the flaps in stages, one notch at a time, waiting to feel how the aircraft responded before moving to the next. Smoke was in the cockpit. Goggles were fogging with their perspiration. The captain had to lean forward to read the instruments. For the final approach, the only working attitude reference he had was a small emergency backup indicator, roughly the size of a hockey puck. At just after 7:17 in the evening, the airport came into sight. Flight 797 touched down on runway 27L at Greater Cincinnati International Airport. The plane shuddered with maximum braking. All 4 main wheel tires blew out. The airplane stopped just short of the taxiway intersection. 7 fire trucks were already in position. 13 firefighters who had been standing by since the tower alerted them watched heavy black smoke rolling from the exits and the forward doors as they were opened. The captain and the first officer tried to return to the cabin to help. The smoke and heat drove them back. They exited the plane through their cockpit windows.
Cockpit windows are really, really high.
Yeah.
Right? They're not stepping out. They're literally leaping out. It's like leaping out of a 5th-story window.
Yeah, you're going to break a leg or something, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of them did. So, yeah, so that drop is like onto tarmac, dude, right? Next time you go to like a big airplane, look how high up they are and go, okay, imagine jumping out of that, right?
Yeah, it's quite high, yeah.
Yeah.
Slides were deployed from the forward doors. 3 of the 4 overwing exit windows were opened by designated passengers. The 4th overwing exit was never opened. 18 passengers and 3 flight attendants got out. They felt their way along the tops of seat backs. They crawled. One survivor found her way out when she saw a dim glow of light through an aperture. Another found his way because he felt a slight draft on the back of his knees. By the time the airplane stopped, visibility inside the cabin was virtually non-existent at any height above 1 foot off the floor. Nobody who escaped saw flames. Not one of them. The fire was still invisible. Then the doors opened, and the fire found more oxygen to feed on. The cabin ceiling had been preheated for the duration of the descent. 30 minutes of hidden burning had worked its way through the lavatory walls and into the ceiling space. Unburned combustible gases had been accumulating along the ceiling throughout, concentrated by the air conditioning packs being switched off. The moment fresh air entered through the open doors and exits, those gases ignited. The NTSB called it a flashfire. The entire cabin interior ignited in seconds. The fuselage skin above the ceiling began to fail. The cabin environment became uninhabitable within 20 to 30 seconds. 23 passengers did not get out. The physical evidence placed most of the fatalities in the aisle or seats between rows 2 and 9, forward of where they had started, moving toward exits they did not reach. The autopsies found no impact injuries, none. Blood analysis showed carbon monoxide saturation in the deceased ranging from 20 to 63%. The threshold for incapacitation is 40 to 50. Cyanide levels range from 0.8 to 5.2 micrograms per milliliter. The toxic threshold is 0.5. The walls, ceiling panels, and seat cushions, the window panes, everything that had burned produced the gases that killed them. The NTSB's conclusion was short. This was a survivable accident. The airplane landed, the structure held, no one was hurt by the crash itself. What killed 23 people was smoke, fire, and a very brief amount of time.
Yeah, and that's kind of brutal, isn't it? It's kind of like the system worked up until it didn't, right?
Yeah.
The plane landed, the structure held, the pilots did their jobs, and still all these people died. And it's not what failed, it's like what, and this is why I like these shows as well. It's like what wasn't designed for this situation? What can we learn from it?
Yeah.
Because the great thing about like flying is actually extraordinarily safe, right?
It really is. Yep.
But because, and it's interesting as human beings, we do that. If a plane crashes or somebody dies on the plane, they put so much effort into figure out what and why so that they can fix it. And they don't do that with cars or, lots of other things in life, right?
Right.
But with airplanes, they do. You know what? And they don't do it with boats. So after we watched all the airplane one, we started watching the boat disaster ones, and they're not as rigorous with like trying to understand what happened, like as they are with airplanes, right?
Right.
One you're in the sky, one you're in the water. Like if you go down in either one, it's not good.
Well, I mean, I think you're moving more people around with an airplane.
It depends how big the boat is.
No.
What cruise ship, Mike?
No. I'm not saying individually.
Oh, you mean in total? Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
There's more people moving daily via airplane than by boat, so it would follow that they would be more rigorous in that way. And plus, a lot of people don't survive airplane crashes. The survivability of an airplane crash is very low.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
With a boat, sometimes you can bob around a bit before you die of hypothermia.
I mean, I've flipped a boat and bobbed around, so,
Have you?
Yep.
Were you drunk?
There may have been imbibing. That may or may not be factual.
You are not going to comment.
I'm not going to comment. You can guess for yourself. Yes, I was pissed. I was pissed out of my head. Anyway.
Once I was in Calgary.
Okay.
I was working with a new colleague.
Right.
And we were going down the stairs and I noticed he was limping.
Okay.
I said, "Oh, have you hurt your leg?" He's like, "No, I lost it in a boating accident last year." It didn't occur to me like that he had lost his leg.
Oh, no.
I look at him and out of my mouth comes, "Well, you seem to be taking it in your stride."
Oh, boy.
He looked at me. I looked at him. I'm like, "Why did I say that?" And he burst out laughing his ass off. And he's like, "You got to have a sense of humor about this shit."
Of course
man.
you do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stan Rogers, the folk singer, was among the 23 who perished aboard that flight. The NTSB report doesn't name him. He exists in the official record the way all the victims do, as data points in a casualty table, as one of the blood samples sent to FAA's Civil Aeronautical Institute in Oklahoma, as a body position noted by investigators working through the wreckage. The report is not cruel in this. It is simply a document with a purpose, and its purpose is not remembrance. What the report cannot tell us other accounts suggest is that he was found near the forward section of the aircraft. Whether he had made it most of the way to an exit or whether he had turned back to help someone else to get there first, no one knows for certain. He was 33 years old, and he was large enough and strong enough that either possibility is entirely plausible, and either one has its own kind of grief. Stan left behind his wife Ariel and 2 young children. He left behind an almost finished album, From Fresh Water, the record he had been completing that spring. It was released posthumously later that same year. It was his most polished work, the sound of an artist fully inhabiting his own voice. The Canadian music community received it in the way you receive something you know you'll never get more of, with gratitude and with devastation in equal measure. Archive recordings became For the Family, released later. Whatever remained in the vaults was carefully tended and eventually given to those who needed it. Outside folk circles, Stan Rogers was not yet widely known when he died. His name would not have registered for most people who didn't actively seek out that world. But the people who knew his work understood immediately what had been lost, and we've all been living with it now for more than 40 years.
Yeah, that's kind of the hard part of this, right? It's the story of one person on that airplane.
I did make sure that we include some others further on in the script, so obviously I know there were other people there.
Don't get upset. I'm not pointing out that you didn't cover everyone. What I'm saying is this is a great loss for the Canadian music scene, right? And he was, 33, just getting started. And you just think about whenever anything like this happens, like, even like the baby on a plane or something could have been the next scientist or Mozart. That whenever somebody's lost, like a future is lost, right?
Gone too soon, yeah.
It's just so sad. And this level, like people who are, 33 and really good musicians. So think of all the unwritten songs and the ideas that were still forming, and it's sad.
It really is. The songs Stan did leave behind have only grown. Northwest Passage was voted the greatest Canadian song of all time in a CBC radio poll in 2005, more than 2 decades after the man who wrote it was gone. His songs about fishing boats and iron ore, about the Franklin expedition and working men coming home, about the dignity of ordinary lives in a vast and indifferent country. They're sung now by people who weren't even born when Stan died. Stan Rogers didn't die alone. The 23 who perished included a young honeymooning couple still in their first days of marriage. There were business travelers heading home to Canada after a week of meetings. There were people who had been visiting family in the American South and were making their way back north. Ordinary passengers on an ordinary Thursday flight with ordinary reasons for being there. The NTSB's final probable cause of the tragedy listed 3 factors: a fire of undetermined origin, an underestimation of fire severity, and misleading information about fire progress provided to the captain. The time taken to descend contributed to the severity of the accident. The NTSB investigated 6 possible ignition sources and could not confirm or rule any of them out. The fire that killed 23 people has no official cause. It came from somewhere inside the walls, and that is as far as the record goes. What the accident did produce was reform. Lavatory smoke detectors became mandatory. Automatic trash receptacle extinguishers, fire-blocking seat cushion materials, and improved emergency lighting are all required after years of deferral. And in a bitter footnote, most of these recommendations had first been issued after the 1973 Varig Airlines fire near Paris, where 124 people died in an almost identical scenario. The NTSB asked for lavatory smoke detectors in September 1973. Flight 797 burned in June 1983, almost 10 years later. Every lavatory smoke detector in commercial aviation today traces a direct line back to runway 27L and that fateful June day. Stan Rogers wrote songs about people who went into hard places and didn't always return. He understood that kind of loss. He wrote it beautifully for years, and then, at 33, he became an example of it. His last album came out that fall. His songs outlasted him by decades and will outlast us too. The Stan Rogers Folk Festival is held every summer in Canso, Nova Scotia, on the coast, where he was from. And that's it for Dark Poutine episode 418, Air Canada Flight 797, The Death of Stan Rogers. That's right, it's time for voicemails. You can leave us a message at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you. Let's see who called us this week. All right, we have a couple of voicemails here. Let's have a listen.
Hi, Dark Poutine boys. This is Peregrine from Victoria, BC. Long-time listener, first-time caller. And my claim to fame is I got married at a music festival, and on the night of my wedding, someone was murdered in her tent just a few hundred feet away from me, and the whole festival abruptly got canceled. That also might make an interesting show for you folks to cover. Anyways, much love, and take a poupée in your toupee.
Oh, boy. Interesting.
Is her name Peregrine?
Peregrine, yeah.
That's a fantastic name.
Right? Like I know of a peregrine falcon, but I don't know that I've ever known a person named Peregrine before, but it's a beautiful name.
That's a great name. I had a peregrine falcon sitting on my windowsill for a while, a couple summers ago.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
I think peregrine, she got married at a music festival. That's
a music festival, and then someone was murdered 100 feet away, and the whole thing, the whole festival got canceled. She didn't say whether or not her marriage got canceled, but I guess she said she got married, so it was complete.
Yeah.
The ceremony was complete.
I'm trying to figure out what she does for a living.
Yeah.
I wonder if she's a musician herself.
That's a good question, Matthew. That's up to you to figure out.
Yeah, I think she's a musician, and she has a bird sanctuary on the side with a name like that.
Oh, interesting. A musician with a bird sanctuary. And does she specialize in some particular type of falcon, Matthew?
No, she specializes in barn swallows.
Barn swallows. I love barn swallows. I remember there was a
little
barn,
boomerang shape,
a barn near my grandmother's house, and there were barn swallows in that barn, and they used to dive bomb us as kids. It was pretty cool.
That was fun. Did you are there barn swallows in this Nova Scotia?
Yeah. Yep.
In BC, are there barn swallows?
I don't know that I've seen any.
Yeah.
But there probably is.
I think they one thing I realized about British Columbia is it's more of a caw-caw than a tweet sort of nature place.
So the barns...
You know what I mean by that? Like caw-caw, like prey birds more than the little ones.
The barn swallow, Hirundo rustica, is a migratory bird commonly seen in British Columbia from May to August. So there you go.
I don't think I've ever seen a barn swallow, but then again, I live downtown and there are no barns. There's one barn that was converted into a pub.
There's horse barns down by the racetrack.
Those aren't barns, those are stables.
Well, there are barns down there too, but anyway.
Really? With like haylofts and shit?
Well, a barn doesn't necessarily have to have a hayloft. It just,
For a barn swallow to live there, it has to.
Okay. All right. I didn't know that.
Making that shit up.
Okay. Matthew is making shit up just trying to make me look dumb. You don't have to try hard. But anywho, thank you, Peregrine. And let's move on to our next voicemail. And we had another voicemail where somebody called in to talk about an author. It was a publicist who called in. And I got your email.
He sounded quite handsome.
He sounded handsome. He had quite a good voice.
Yeah, he sounded, yeah. So, okay. You know who you are, Big D.
Yeah. Oh, Big D. Oh, no. That's it for this week's voicemails. Again, you can leave us one at 1-877-327-5786 or 1-877-DARK-PTN. We'd love to hear from you, even if it is just to say hi and to tell us to go shit in our hats. If you're stumped for what to chat with us about, a quick story is welcome. And we don't have any Donut Money donors or patrons this week, but that's okay. We know you love us.
We'll be doing a campaign.
Matthew says he's doing a campaign. We'll see.
I don't like camping, but I like campaigning.
Thanks to all our patrons and Donut Money donors, past and present, for your generosity. It helps to keep the show going. You can become a patron of Dark Poutine at patreon.com/darkpoutine. For a one-time donation, you can send us donut money via PayPal or interact using our email address, darkpoutinepodcast@gmail.com. If you don't already subscribe to the show, it would mean a lot if you did. You can easily find Dark Poutine on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you haven't gotten yours yet, my 2 books are available to order via links on the Dark Poutine website or anywhere fine books are sold. And speaking of darkpoutine.com, check it out for show notes and other cool stuff. We'd appreciate it if you gave Dark Poutine a like or a follow on Facebook and Instagram. Most importantly, thank you for listening. Tell your friends about us. Word of mouth is a powerful thing. And that's it for this episode of Dark Poutine.
Bye, y'all.
Yes, chowder to all of you folks. I don't know why I'm talking like that. Okay, goodbye.